Hello everyone and welcome to the British Motor Museum, where we had sound issues, which is why my lips are not matching these words. Very unfortunate, but we were here for the BMC and Leyland rally, and a great display of Maestros here to celebrate 40 years of the Maestro. This one came all the way from Norway, and just quite astonishing. Oh, hello Mike. There's Mike stumbling into shot, a friend of ours. But this is Eric and Karen, who own this Ledbury Maestro, for they drove all the way from Norway, some 1,500 kilometres. I'm very sad we lost their interview to the sound issues, but they were explaining that it took several days to get over here, and that this Maestro has only covered 7,700 kilometres in total in its life. It's a Ledbury Maestro. It was a kit destined for Bulgaria, completely knocked down, came back to the UK, assembled in Ledbury, hence the name, in Herefordshire, and this one was taken to Norway and never registered. So Eric finally managed to get it registered, and it is the car you see today. And next to it is an MG Maestro Turbo, one of 505 built. So we've got the extremes there of the basic version, and then the turbo. This is a Henley blue, I think this was a 1.3 SL, sort of a rep special back in the day, with a grey trim to signify you were a bit better than base level. But yeah, a wonderful array of Maestros, some with the plastic bumpers, some with the steel bumpers, as on this one. We've got this beautiful beige example tucked away up the back here, and this is a very early one from 1983, from that first year of production. They did have all sorts of issues with the bumpers when they were first putting these cars together, but they did get their act together in the end. While the cameras were rolling, this amazing hot dog burger van type Maestro rolled in. It's based on a Maestro van. It clearly needs a lot of restoration work, but Miss Hubnut was particularly taken by it. She's a strange one, that one. I mean, she's with me, she must be strange. But yeah, while we were looking at that, we bumped into Project Nigel. This is Paul Roverman, as he is on Facebook, and yeah, he owns Project Nigel, a very colourful Rover 25. We will see later on. We had a chat. He's probably managed to record the chat properly, because he did set his camera recording just before we had our little chat here. And then of course we bumped into Steph of iDriver Classic. Always a pleasure to see Steph. She was working very hard at the show for her employer, Lancaster Insurance, hence the banner in the background there. But yeah, we had a bit of a chat about Project Nancy, her Morris Minor, which has an unfortunate engine issue at the moment. She's done 7,000 miles in it since March. So these things happen with older cars. She suspects a valve has burnt out or something's gone a little bit wrong. It's nothing major, and hopefully Project Nancy will be back on the road fairly soon. But this is enough of you not hearing what went on the day. We now got some footage we actually managed to record, so let's jump straight into the vans. So another important part of the Leyland story is LDV, which began as the, I think it was more the Morris van division within the British Motor Corporation, but developed the Sherpa vans, and these are the largest versions, what became the convoys. So we've got a nice display, the different body styles: low roof, high roof, double cab pickup, loyal snail. I like that. They're not all very fast. Some of them didn't even have turbos, but it's a lovely lineup. It was great to see so many convoys. And here is the J4, which preceded the Sherpa. In fact, the rear body is almost identical to the Sherpa, but these are forward control with the engine between the front seats. I remember seeing these everywhere when I was a child. The production went on quite a long time. And we got a Rogue Ford Thames in here as well. Obviously not part of the BMC BL story, but interesting to compare and contrast. Now this little corner is for the Vanden Plas or Plas, depending on your preference, cars. So the Allegro being just one example of the cars that were originally taken off the production lines and shipped down to the Vanden Plas headquarters, and they were sort of rebuilt. All the interior, lovely plush wood and leather. I'm sure we can probably have a look inside this one. But later they streamlined production. But yeah, the quality of the wood and leather just absolutely superb. And the name did live on in some forms. We've got a Rover SD3 as they're known, the first of the 200s, the second joint development with Honda, which is why it looks an awful lot like a Honda Civic. But again, we've still got the wood and the leather interior, but this is just effectively a slightly posher model. It's up the top of the lineup. This is an earlier 3 litre, which is the big BMC Farina saloons, and this is the poshest version of those with the prettiest front end treatment, I think, as well. And that later they tweaked that with a 4 litre Rolls-Royce engine. But these are probably my favourites, the Princess 1100s and 1300s. Again, very much based on the Austin Morris versions, but different front end treatment, all the wood and leather inside, and top-notch paint as well. They drive like little limousines. They are absolutely blissful little cars. Now we've got another of the Rovers here as well, and then the aforementioned 4 litre R with the Rolls-Royce engine. A sort of slightly tweaked military Rolls-Royce engine, but yeah, extra power. Got some minis. There are minis variously around the show, which is good to see, because obviously minis are a huge part of the BMC BL story. These are fairly late ones, late 90s, early 2000s, 51 plate. That must be one of the last. Production ending in the year 2000. In fact, I think these are all particularly late examples. Aha, but here we have what's now known as the Cooper RSP, Rover Special Projects. This was the first production Cooper since the early 70s. They brought the name back. Each one had the John Cooper signature on the stripes on the bonnet and a sort of unique black half leather interior. But this one seems to have a bit of extra wood. I'm not sure if they had the wood from standard. But such was a success that the Cooper came back as a full-time production model. It's a gorgeous little Equinox next to it. Look at the paint on that. Got angel eye headlights as well. So the Rover R8 platform had a number of spin-offs. They managed to spin off cabriolets, even an estate. But one of my favourites is the Tomcat Coupe here, with its lift-out section roofs. Some of these had the 2 litre turbo engine as well for plenty of power. I think the bonnet bulge may hint that these might be turbos. That's that sort of Polynesian, I think that colour is. It's very, very of its time. I absolutely love it. So it's a fine display by the Rover Coupe Owners Club. And then we've got a more standard hatchback, 214 SLI there, and then more. It's gorgeous purple again. I think it's a very similar shade to that Mini we were just looking at. Just lovely. And meant to be very, very fine handling cars. I've never driven one. I think I once sat in one and interviewed Matt Furious driving, or he interviewed me. I can't remember which way round we did it, but that happened at some point in a dim and distant past at Bromley Pageant of Motoring, I think. There's the Rover 200/400 Owners Club, and here is one of the estates, known as a Tourer. And again, I think this will have the 2 litre engine because it's got the big bonnet bulge on it. Yeah, 420 GSI. On the 400s, which were the saloons and Tourers, they called them GSIs. On the hatchbacks, they called them GTI. And it made a difference of one insurance group calling it a GSI rather than a GTI. All very weird. But I see Marinas, and I think we better go and look at those, don't you? I'm having to go solo temporarily to take in some magnificent Marinas. So we've got the Marina 3 there, a Marina 2s with their black grills, and a Tal Suntour camper. Got a lovely green estate here. That's Marina 2, I think. Spectacular Ital. That's a very late one, I think, in about 1984. And a superb beige example here as well. So much to see. And entirely unrelated to BMC BL is Jowett. So I've got to look at the Jowett Javelin just because I want one with most of my soul. They are amazing, amazing cars. So that'll be Bradford with the flat twin engine, but the Jupiters here, based on the Javelin running here, with a flat 4 engine. So very, very short engine layout. Great to see. Before we get to Range Rovers, I'm sure you want to see those. We've got all these Metros to take in as well. So the original form of Metro, and then they revised the R6 generation when they moved to K series power, but were limited by development budgets, so still had to use the same body shell, and they managed to make it look impressively different, I think. So that's an early MG Metro with a Mark 1 front end, then we got the facelifted front end, and then the later K series version, and that's the Rover 100, which is the final version. In some markets these were sold as 100s as well. That's lovely, and look at that tiny little mini lights on this beige Metro called Norman. Another special early MG next to the later facelift. So that's a good description, or example rather, of how the styling evolved. It's onto a pickup someone has made, and that's lovely. Rover 100 convertible, very, very rare. The Metro City's got the simpler headlamp treatment, just to make sure that everyone knew you were living in poverty. Another MG there. Of course, these still use the A series engine from the Mini, but substantially reworked, the A Plus version. Vanden Plas Metro, that was your super plush, but I think this is another city. I see no rear wiper, so it must be bottom of the range, but that was like the final facelift of that shape. So yeah, great to see. We've got more Rover 800s here, including a police example. We are struggling to get around this show, folks, and I'm delighted to see so many Rover 600s. Such worthy cars, and so horribly overlooked in the world of Rover. So this is very encouraging. Great cars. These two are the turbocharged TIs, which have an enjoyable amount of power. And oh, this one's got a Hubnut sticker. Marvellous. It's also for sale. So there we go. I think we were chatting to the owner of this car earlier. It has been to Festival of the Unexceptional before. So yeah, for my money, these 600s are one of the prettiest Rovers ever made. I think they're absolutely beautiful. And is that one Volcano up there? It's suffering terribly from lack appeal, but yes, it is Volcano. A sort of orange metallic. Yummers. Lovely cars. Now this is a contender for car in the show for me. This is an Austin Apache. It's a reimagining of the BMC 1100. That's one of these, but redesigned by Giovanni Michelotti and built in South Africa. So it's got an entirely different front treatment to the BMC 1100. Vastly different, and at the back it's got more of a pronounced boot as well, so it's actually a free box design, unlike the original BMC 1100. So it's a remarkable little thing. It kind of looks quite Triumph because of the Michelotti link, but yeah, built in South Africa. This one came over here in about 1985 and was just left in storage for the best part of 20 years. So I believe there are a couple of these here in the UK, but they are very, very rare. There was a similar offshoot built in Spain which had circular headlamps, the Orphe Victoria, and I think there might be one or two of those over here as well, but very rare. So that is fascinating to see. So Triumph Acclaims were the first of the Honda era cars, all part of British Leyland, desperately trying to branch out and get new models without some of the development costs, and this one is done up in a very sort of 1990s style, so that's quite cool to see. But generally they look a bit more like this. They were seen as very, very elderly people cars back in the day. They weren't very cool, which is a shame, because I think the Civic won more cool points, on which these are so obviously based, or more specifically the Ballard, which was the four-door saloon version. Pure badge engineering. The only real Triumph input was the seats. The seats were made here in the UK. The cars were assembled here in the UK, and local part content went up throughout their production run. But ultimately, this would not be a Triumph for Triumph. It was the last Triumph. And after these, the Triumph brand was killed off. The next Rover Honda project was the Rover 200 we saw a little earlier. Now, success stories within British Leyland are a little hard to find, but I think no greater success was had than the Range Rover, to be honest. Launched in 1970, a couple of years into British Leyland's formation, and to be honest, they didn't really know what they were doing or what they were building. They just built them and hoped people would buy them, and thankfully they did. The Range Rover went up market, but this early example, this is a pre-production example, Shows off the vinyl interior. They had hose down floors. It was all very, very simple, but very, very comfortable, because you got coil spring suspension for the first time in a Land Rover product. So very, very different. But yeah, this is let's remind myself, this is YVB155H. I think if you go into the museum, you can see 153H, which was a car used in lots of pre-launch material, and I think all the YVBs were used for the journalist tests. I think it was down in Cornwall they did the launch way back in 1970. And then of course the Range Rover gently evolves, getting more plush as times went on. This is the In Vogue special edition that led to the Vogue becoming a permanent production model. And then again, rear doors, you know, luxuries, folks, luxuries. And then there was facelift later on with this horizontally slatted grille. So the Range Rover just carried on selling. This is one of the last examples. Over here, this is an LSE, is it? Yeah, it is. It's got the 8-inch longer wheelbase. Effectively a testing of the new platform for the P38 Range Rover. Some examples of which we can see here. But yeah, these are called the Soft Dash. Last year of Classic production. This was now the Range Rover Classic. And different dashboard, slightly different glass treatment. But yeah, an interesting way to test some of the running gear in these. 4.2 litre V8 engine in the Range Rover LSEs. And then the P38 carried the story on further. So these were developed latterly in the BMW era, replaced by the L322 Range Rovers along the line. We've got a nice 6-wheel, presumably Carmichael fire tender here, complete with trailer. Just the exploring, but yeah, the Range Rovers had a very interesting production life, in production from 1970 until 1994, I think, in the Classic era. We've got more Triumphs, I'm very pleased to announce. We've got a little Spitfire here, and the TR7s, of course, very, very iconic British Leyland era car. We've got Triton Green, one of my absolute favourite shades. And this Belgium registered one, what a colour that is. That looks similar to the Volcano. It may not be an original shade. But the TR7 was originally developed as a fixed head coupe, and only latterly, very late in production, became a convertible. The convertible it always needed to be. But unfortunately, they thought that federal rollover rules in America would make it impossible to market a convertible, so they only built them as coupes. And it took way too long for them to get V8 engines, which they eventually did, and a convertible roof right at the end of production. So we're amongst some of my favourite cars now, the big Triumphs, the big 6s, the 2000s and the 2500s, 2.5s. This one's got a beautiful Radio Caroline sticker in the back. It is the very stylish estate car version. I think the estate bodies were built by Car Bodies in Coventry. You get a little opening quarter light in the rear window. A little indicator on the B pillar, very unusual for its time, and gorgeous Michelotti styling. So we can see here, this is the Mark II example, which looks very much like the Triumph Stag front end, and this is the earlier Mark I. Lovely, lovely cars. So we've seen the Maestros, over 40 Maestros they reckon. Where are the Montegos? Here they are. There's only 3 of them. I think possibly because the Maestro Montego Owners Club covers both of them, and the focus is very much on Maestros. But the Montego was the saloon and latterly estate version of the platform. It was meant to be a much larger car, but they are pretty much identical. The doors are pretty much the same. Not absolutely identical, but very, very similar. But obviously I have soft spots for Montegos because my dad had 2 during my childhood. First car I drove after passing my test was a Montego estate. I absolutely love them. But next year is anniversary year for the Montego, so I'm sure we'll see many more next year. So we had a quick chat with Project Nigel earlier, and this is Project Nigel, a very, very colourful bits of everything Rover 25. Good to see. I think it's been to a Hubnut social or 2. So here are the Morris Minors, obviously another hugely critical part of the BMC and latterly Leyland story. They began as BMCs, they were built into the Leyland era. Loving this white Traveller. This looks quite mean and moody. This, I reckon performance lurks within. But yeah, great to see so many of them. If you want to see more Morris miners, Steph I Driver Classic recently went to the national meeting of miners, and Becca, Passenger Seat Podcast, so you can see lots of miners in their videos. But yeah, great to see so many. We've got some interestingly modified ones as well, which is lovely to see. But let's see what else we can find up in this section. So we're now in the section of the site that used to be the Land Rover 4x4 area, where I had many an exciting 4x4 ride around a sort of a jungle track area. Now sadly it's just a boring car park, but it does mean they've managed to create quite a lot of Rover 75s in, including this MG ZT here, MG being the sporty version. Has chroma flare paint. It was a factory option. This one's got some spectacular lack appeal. It could almost be a French car. But yeah, lovely colour. So this is where we're finding the more modern vehicles for the most part. Another Mini here. We've got a Mark 1 Mini. This was actually built from a knockdown kit in Pretoria, South Africa. So what an interesting history this one has. I don't know if the colour scheme is factory original. It looks like it could be. 3,600 were built there apparently. Wow. And this is from 1962. Little Mini 850 for bombing around South Africa. And next to that is a Metro Mosaic. This is a limited edition they did back in the day. Again, this has nothing to do with BMC BL, but it's great to see it here. A Bristol 404. Astonishing car. Bristol built cars much how it built planes. Sort of highest level of attention and standards of build quality. Absolutely extraordinary. These flaps, we've seen this on Bristols before. One side holds the battery and one the spare wheel, I believe. So the whole thing flaps up. You're very annoying, car. Please stop that at once. So it's probably time to wrap this one up. People are starting to leave, and there's still so much more we could see. There just hasn't been time. It's so many cars, and it's great to see this celebration of BMC and British Leyland. But we'll end with the Farinas here, because we've got a right mix. Some of the bigger Farinas, some of the smaller Farinas. But look at those tail fins, all different for different cars in the range. The Sporty Magnet has got a sort of breeze backy style fin, more plush on the Vanden Plas, slightly rounded. It's yeah, so much badge engineering, but they did actually make their differences with these cars. So it's good to see a nice mix of them. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the day as much as we have. It's been spectacular. We're absolutely wiped out. So much to see, and we shall see you in a future video. Farewell. I'll go on, have a bit more failed sound bonus footage if you like. This is Daniel, and he has a Maestro that he won in a Retro Bleep raffle. Retro Bleep, been a friend of mine through the Auto Bleep forum, the slightly beige sweary forum. And this is an Apple 2000 Maestro. Note it's on a Y plate, so about the year 2000. Again, related to the Bulgarian kits, just like the Ledburys, but the Apples were actually built in Bulgaria. Bulgaria built about 2,000 Maestros, and a few came back to the UK, were sold here, and yeah, very briefly, with bits often raided from scrapyards to do the right-hand drive conversion. So you could still buy a Maestro as late as 2001. That was the last of the Ledburys, but the Apple was an even more brief foray into extra life for the Bulgarian Maestros. Fascinating. I also had a chat with my friend Ruben from the Netherlands. You will have seen him recently in the Reliant Robin video. I drove his Fiat Cinquecento a few years back in the Netherlands. He has many interesting cars, including this Maestro, which he's now had for 5 years. So I'm sorry we lost the sound, Ruben. Very professional of us, as always. Now this needs the voiceover treatment as well. This is an Austin Maestro van, but it isn't, because it's actually a Land Rover Freelander. To test the mechanical package, the new 4-wheel drive system and the 1.8K series engine, they built these fascinating mules using Maestro vans, extending the nose and hiding the running gear as best they could, so they could test it in secret. And this is one of the many fascinating vehicles here at the British Motor Museum collection. You can also go in the collection centre and usually see a Metro van that actually harbours MGF running gear mid-mounted. So yeah, I'm pointing at the collection centre building there. Yeah, fascinating. Now, I really enjoyed this lineup of standards. The Standard Triumph company, which was bought into not BMC, it joined later on and got dragged into the British Motor Holdings, as it was briefly, before it became British Leyland, as various mergers took place. But yeah, these lovely little things. This is a standard 8. There's a standard 10 pickup next to it. Absolutely beautiful, really smart looking thing. I'm not so hot on the pre-war and early post-war Triumph, standard Triumph, so I don't know what's next to it. I don't think I even managed to find out, but I loved the companion, the little estate car next to it. Absolutely beautiful. What a colour. I can't believe for 1 minute that's a factory colour, but very nice nonetheless. And then there's an early post-war standard 12 possibly, I'm absolutely guessing, and I really like the military one with sort of a utilitarian grille on it. I could see there's Mini Hubnut. He was having a lovely time. Miss Hubnut just walked straight in front of him. How upsetting for poor Mini Hubnut. But yeah, this was 1924, I think, this standard. 14.1, I think it was, or something ridiculous. Horsepower. That's not brake horsepower. And a Kenilworth body, I seem to recall as well. That was lovely to see. And then next to that, oh sorry, I was just admiring the grill badge. Come and look at the grill badge. Come and look at the grill badge. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? When standard meant high standard, rather than standard as in bog standard. And a Vanguard next to it would have been a Beetleback in saloon form. This is, again, a very rare estate. Come, let's look at the rear. And this is where we find out that really, this is the, come on, right, there we go. This is the Berlingo of its day. Yeah, Berlingo Multispace. In the 1950s. This MGB, absolutely fantastic colour. I don't know what colour that is. And this is a little Nash Metropolitan, joint development between Austin and Nash Motor Company in America. An absolute failure because they had tiny little 1200cc engines, but a few were sold there, but then they actually made serious attempts to sell them in the UK because they spent so much money on development. They thought, well, we've got to try and get some of this back. So great little cars, very, very Americanized styling with the very, very inboard wheels. Very, very pretty. And next to that, we've got an Austin Ant, which I don't know a lot about. Sort of mini-ish based, but I think they were four-wheel drive. There is one inside the museum, right behind where we're standing, just at the moment. As Austin A70 Hereford had been converted into a woodie by an aftermarket company, Papworth Industries, I think it was, near Cambridge, and it was a scheme set up to employ people who had TB, so they would have been fairly knocked about by it and not in great shape, and this gave them employment building this remarkable woodie. We'll go and have a look at the back of it as well, so we can really take in the detail and the level of work being used for a picnic here, looking absolutely splendid. It's a car I've not seen before, so it was lovely to see it. And if you look inside, you can see even the roof is made of wood. Brilliant. Next to that was an Austin A90 Atlantic. This yet another failed attempt by Austin to crack the American market. It was like, we can build a sports car that they want, but it has a 4-cylinder engine, 2,199cc as I recall. And despite winning records at Indianapolis, it just wasn't enough engine. So again, they tried to recoup their losses by selling the cars here. This one's been restored. This is the owner taking me through the restoration diary. Look at that album cover flapping slightly there in the middle of shot. That is this car. It was repainted in the early 1980s. Great stuff. Some nice commercials as well. Got an Austin A40 based pickup. Absolutely lovely. And this incredible fuel tanker. The cab looks very Bedford OB to me, but it had indeed got an Austin badge on it. Dressing the part in there, looking good. And yeah, that was a fascinating sight. Not something I'd ever seen before. Now as we look at some Maxis and some Rover SD1s behind, both fascinating hatchbacks in their own way, I just want to say huge apologies to anyone who we spoke to who hasn't featured or whose car hasn't been seen. We're not deliberately ignoring anyone, there were just so many cars to see, and obviously we had our sound issues, so there is actually a limit to how much of that voiceover footage I'm going to use here. But yeah, we're mostly coming to look at the fact there are two avocado SD1s here. Beck, the one on the right here, we see very often, usually at the NEC, but occasionally elsewhere, but the other one I'd not seen before. And this is a V8S, which we found out last year has tiny little headlamp wipers. The gold one next to it belongs to Tim, and I think it was the NEC last year he gave us a headlamp wiper demonstration. So thanks for that, Tim. So good to see. We're almost there, folks. Stick with us as we look at land crabs. The Austin Morris 1800s, but that's a Wolseley in the middle, and we can see the different rear end treatments. The burgundy car on the right is a Mark 1, so that's the earlier treatment. Wolseley's always had their own rear styling treatment, and then the facelift on the left there with the taller rear lights. And then I think we'll go and have a look at the front so we can compare. Love this rally spec one there. There was a good amount of rally cars. The historic rally car group got a great display, but I don't think we caught that on camera. Sorry guys. I usually do try to see what they're doing because they use their cars so much. So yeah, the different front end treatments. These are later ones, the facelift front end, and I'm probably talking about Austin Kimberleys at the moment because Austin Kimberleys were based on the land crab platform. A lot of people were saying, well, what's a land crab? These are land crabs. So cool because they were so wide. Isagonis's favourite car, but sadly the buying public not convinced. But yeah, Wolseley's had a little illuminated grille badge, and that's the earlier front end, smaller indicators on those. And then I think we're about to turn around and have a look at this car's replacement, which was the Leyland Princesses. So as we spin around, we can see the next generation effectively, similar platform, still with transverse engines, still with hydroelastic suspension, although I think the Princess changed to hydro gas as an evolution of that. Maxis changed over during their production run. I think Princesses were always hydro gas, thinking about it. But this one was a particularly lowly spec, a sort of base spec Princess, no vinyl trim on the back. So this was great to see. We did have a quick chat with the owner, but again we still haven't got the sound, and he was just saying it was basically one owner from new. The first owner had barely driven the car, and I think this chap had recommissioned it and invited us in to look at the plush vinyl interior. So usually you get vinyl coverings on these pillars here, but not on this lowly base spec, just on the seats inside. This is a Princess 2. This is very much what I remember with that vinyl roof, the side stripes. So this is towards the end of Princess production in the early 80s. This one dating from about 81, 82, I think. So yeah, the land crabs over there became the Princesses over here. And now we're going to look at another land crab spin. It's the Austin 3 litres. So this took that transverse platform and turned it into longitudinal rear wheel drive. Now ADJ here is a car I know well. I actually drove it to Pride of Longbridge probably 10 or 11 years ago when it belonged to my friend Peter. We had a good chat with the new owner of that car, and hopefully the two of them are going to be in touch so they can catch up about this car's history. It's got some very interesting Downton modifications on it, intake manifold and exhaust. But yeah, fascinating cars, and we're going to end this extra section here. So thank you very much for watching. Sorry the sound has been rubbish. We'll see you in another video. Bye.